Yeah.
Can I just put a little plug in? It's just in the back of my head. So I think coming back to family therapy and single session work, and it's been a delight. It's been over many years that the CAM services that Jeff mentioned have incorporated, used a single session format to bring family work into what was primarily individual youth work, with great results for the young person as well as for the family, which is just brilliant. But I loved just a little something that stood out for me in the Tasmanian paper was a very often forgotten role of siblings. It really stood out for me that siblings were so appreciative and loved the family sessions. And it's just an old kind of little hobby horse, an interest of mine. I think sibling relationships have been underdone in family therapy generally. So I was really interested to read that, and it's it brings me back to good old family therapy and the importance of being inclusive and engaging with all family members. Yeah, which takes me to the walk-in finding, their version of single session, that. As I remember, I think it was a 2012 paper, again, from the walk-in group about that it was much more engaging of men. And when you think about that, I've heard that also about Zooming through COVID times, that men are more likely to be included in families. So there are some good things that come out of bad times.
And also more inclusive of marginalised cultural communities.
Right.
And I think one thing we haven't talked about in the discussion so far is that those sort of the findings, the research findings, we've talked about how they influence clinicians and clinicians' thinking and attitude, and also encourages clients to take a more active role. It also then translates into how services should be provided. So this is partly why I think it's so influential and spreading, is that it single session thinking really help managers and service designers think, how do we provide our services? And I think ultimately single session thinking is a service delivery model rather than a particular therapeutic model, that then it's a service delivery model that influences and adapts and changes people's clinical work. But at the moment, and we outlined this in the editorial, and I've been predicting this for some time, is that the demand for services, as there's a destigmatisation of counselling, that we're following America. And so we've got a destigmatised community around seeking help. We've got an informed community who have a much more expertise around therapy and help seeking, and they want services when they want them, how they want them, and there's not more public money to keep expanding services. So services are going to have to respond to that dilemma in really creative, thoughtful ways, and single session thinking can be a real asset for managers and service designers. And there's an assumption that's come out of COVID, and we're starting to see it now, that to respond to the demand, we just increase numbers of sessions. That's been done with Medicare rebates and support, but that's actually created longer waiting lists. And also clients, professionals are going from public service into private practice. And so it's actually creating some real difficulties. And the single session frame helps people sort of say, well, look, let's try and give people what they want early as possible and see where that leads to. And that addresses a significant percentage of people, which then frees up time for longer term work as needed by the client, not assuming the designer is going to create a one size fits all. Sorry.
I think there are 4 impediments to single session therapy, or 4 barriers to overcome. The first is money, how much the therapist wants to be paid. The second is money, how much the client can afford to pay. The third is the therapist theory. Change is slow. We have to look at 9 developmental lines. We have to do all. The third is the therapist theory. And the fourth, finally, is the client's strengths and weaknesses, what abilities they have, what problems they have. But it would be much better if we were looking at, well, number one is how to elevate the client. So having a theory that supports the client instead of undercuts the client. And we make it affordable so that people don't feel like, well, if I go to therapy, I have to go twice a week for years and I can't afford it. And I have to cry all the time and they're going to embarrass me. And all of these things that are sort of the stereotypes, maybe it's not entirely true, but they interfere with people. And so when I say, people ask me sometimes, I'm at the dog park and somebody says, oh, what do you, oh, I'm sort of semi-retired. I'm a psychologist. Oh, what's your specialty? Oh, brief therapy. I even work on one session sometime. And the first question somebody says, how do you make a living doing that? Like, don't you want them to come every week and leave their $100 or whatever they leave, you know? How do you make a living? And then they start to tell me, well, I was in therapy for 6 years. And I saw the therapist 3 times a week, and I'm really smart and educated. And if it took me 6 years or 3 years, how is some poor devil going to get anything in 1 or 2 visits? And there's all this, it's the mindset, as my colleague Flavio Canistra calls it, the mindset, the beliefs that we bring in that sets so much of what gets done. And if you expect things to happen, somebody once said, if somebody expects they're going to be a success or a failure, they're probably right. If you think you're going to be a success, you'll succeed. And if you think you're not going to, then you won't. And so finding some ways to kind of shift the culture, and that's why I think single session thinking, going global one step at a time, I think we're at the beginning of a large change where people, well, maybe I went and talked to somebody and they gave me some ideas. I took the ball and ran with it. They told me I wasn't so bad. I just needed to think about how I wanted. Oh, I could do that. And so I think it's such a paradigm shift or a conceptual shift. Then all the technology, the techniques, the methods, that follows from it. But it's first, and I think some of the training exercises that have been done at the Bouverie, asking people, can you tell me a time where somebody said something and it changed the way you think? Oh, that's right. So I can make a shift suddenly. I can remember times in college, a professor saying something and it got me to shift my thinking, or not just a professor in college. That was a long time ago. And so I think we're at the beginning of a very exciting time in the field, but it's going to be, it raises the issues. My colleagues who are primarily in private practice, they tell me, well, how can I make a living doing that? And I say, well, if you see some people for one visit, and you help them, they'll come back and they'll send their friends. And they'll also, plus you're in a service profession. You're really supposed to be serving them, not just milking them along to see how much you can get out of them and that sort of thing. But I think that's one of the economics of this whole system are going to be very important of how many walk-in sessions do you need to make it worth having somebody sitting there all day ready for a walk-in? If they only see one client, it may not be cost effective. It may not pay for itself. There's a lot of issues, but that's why reading the yellow, whatever we're calling it, the fine Australian and New Zealand journal.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And the yellow rag.
I keep hesitating because in the United States, the term yellow, when it's applied, there's something called yellow journalism. And it's seen as sort of a negative, like it's seen as sort of cheap and bad. And that's why I don't want to say I don't want to call it the yellow rag or the yellow, whatever. But I think people reading.
It has me just laughing about our Australian cheeky colloquialisms, how we could really run with something that might be seen otherwise as disrespectful.
I've been trying to understand. I every now and then Google how to talk like an Australian. What do they mean when we're going to have a convo in the Avo? And what does this mean? And of course, I'm from California, and I could probably speak a jargon that you'd go, "What?" You know.
Yeah.
I do love how Australians abbreviate everything. And there's a famous football ground in Melbourne that you know, Michael, the MCG, and people even shorten that to the G.
To the G.
I like it because it's understood and it's informal and it's not overly stuffy, and but sometimes it's. I'm sure you probably have to have a book called "Why Do the English Still Speak That Way?" or why are Americans the way they are? It's,
I wanted to just pick up on that previous conversation with Michael about your term mindset, or Flavio's term about mindset. And you were talking about the mindset of the therapist, but it just sparked for me one of my favorite stories, the experience of listening to a 15-year-old who was comparing, she was being invited to reflect on her experience with her dad in a single session. And she was comparing that with her regular weekly sessions with the school psychologist. And she was sitting there chewing gum and saying, well, yeah, I can't remember the psychologist's name, but Kylie, something like that. You know, Kylie was lovely, but by the time we talked about the week, we didn't get to the real stuff. And she said, when I knew there was just this time with my dad, she said, I knew there was no point in bullshitting. And so clients as well as therapists, when they come in that, really, there's something about being in the moment in a really focused, collaborative way where you're both together trying to create something that's useful, that's usable, that people can go away with. It's really stimulating, I think, both ways. And I think when Jeff's talking about implementation and organisations embedding it, there's definitely something about giving the message behind the message that one can be enough sometimes if we work together and we're really focused. And when clients know that it is possible, for some people it's one session can be enough, knowing that they can come back, that the door is open. That's really important, I think, that open door policy. Knowing that some people do well with one, but it's fine if they want more, but they make that decision, not us.
Shay and Bob and I were beginning to give presentations, and we talk about success stories and what percentage and good outcomes and all that. People would say, aren't there failures in single session therapy? And my response was no, because it just takes more than one. If we're not saying one at a time, but we're not insisting if you don't hit a home run, you're out of here. It may take two. So it just means one wasn't what was needed. Two was needed, or three was needed, or every week for a year was needed, or intermittent was needed, or whatever. Again, it's part of that mindset idea instead of, so you're saying everybody can get better in what? No, we're saying everybody, if they have one, many people will find that's adequate, and those that don't find it's adequate should have more. And as Jeff was saying, and if we give many one, then we have the resources to give the other people what they need, given there's...
I love that comment, and it's so hard to keep that in people's head when you talk about single session and single session thinking, but it is... all of those service options become available. And in a way, what single session thinking helps is align the response and the therapist response and the service response to what the client actually does, their natural help behaviour. And as soon as you put that to people that let's say that a significant number of people aren't going to come back, whether you like it or not, whether you plan for more sessions or not, whether no matter what the diagnosis or severity, how should you approach that first session? You sort of make it accessible and try and give people as much as they want. But if they need more or want more, you provide that. So all of those service system options become available, which I think is a good service.
That's a good word, option. It's on the menu, and for many people, what they need. It's not you only get this. It's not one session and out. It's one single session doesn't mean necessarily only one session, but as you were saying, it means having a plan. What do you want to get from today? And we've got 10 minutes left, and what do you need to walk out of here with so that it was worthwhile?
It'd be sort of like a restaurant where you go in, and the stereotype or the cynicism about single session thinking might be you can only come in, you can only have an entree, and then you better go, and you can't. And the stereotype of the ongoing work is saying, I really care about this person. As they come in, you get the 10 from dessert to sweets, the degustation sort of 10 dishes. That's what you have to have because I care about you. So it's sort of actually, what do you want?
Yeah. I think it's really interesting how you're preempting some of the skepticism and criticisms up front, which is interesting. But also it had me think about, I was speaking with my colleagues on the team that I work on recently, and we were talking about how much work, which is a hell of a lot of work, that we do on the first session anyway. We do so much work to set it up, to introduce ourselves, to cover off all the admin things that we need to do the consents, and as well as to really create the space where we think, I hope this person can work with me as a therapist. I hope that I can be helpful in this person's life or in their circumstance. And so it would be wonderful for me to think that I could work really, really hard in every session because I only have this one time with this person, this one chance to influence what might be happening with all of this.
There's no time like the present.
Right.
I've always felt that first sessions were incredibly special. There's a kind of that meeting with people, that the freshness of that, the immediacy, and I've had a number of experiences where I have had ongoing therapy, and then looked back to that first session and realized that I knew some things back then that I'd lost track of along the way, or that the relationship had become so cozy and easy that I'd lost the edge that I had right back at the beginning. And by the edge, I don't mean critique. I mean just that kind of certain knowing, a certain knowledge of somebody that you get when you first meet them. And I always took longer for a first session because of the things you mentioned, Sonia. But I would write almost an essay after first sessions because they were always so rich. So that's a lovely way, I think, to kind of think about. Single sessions are like that. They're rich, they're immediate, they're stimulating because it's you're working in the moment. And
there's only one first time, or Cat Stevens in the song said, the first cut is the deepest. It changes things. I think that's very true. And oftentimes we get into a rhythm or a pattern and it's more of the same and more. I think most therapy happens in a single session, but we don't know which session it will be. Maybe the first, maybe the third, maybe the 28th, and maybe the third year. And by saying, let's meet once and see where we're at, it increases the chances that one will be the valuable one. Even when we're going on for more sessions, it doesn't mean something's wrong. But when I was a trainee many years ago, I trained with a family therapist, a man called Carl Whitaker. And he was a well-known family therapist at the time. And one of the things Carl would do when we met with families, sometimes ongoing for a number of weeks, and Carl would say in one of the sessions, the people say, well, we'll see you next week. We have our appointment. And he said, well, I've penciled it into my book, but if you don't really want to work for a week, we can take a week off. He would recultivate their motivation. So it wasn't just we always meet Tuesday at 10 and we'll figure out what to do once you get here. Maybe we don't need to meet is there something special you really want to work on? Is there something are you ready to make some changes, or should we just, so that he was always getting people to lean into the therapy, have the excitement of, I'm going to see the therapist today, we're going to do something, instead of I'm going to go and use Pam's clients, we're going to bullshit. Or, how'd your week go? What's new? What'd you think of the politics? See any good movies? How about the rugby match? How's school? Oh, well, we'll see you next week. I think doing anything to get people to feel this is a special moment. The field is open. New possibilities could happen. The past is past.
Don't you love the don't you love the fact that a very small disruptive idea that one session may be enough can generate so many different disruptive but potentially positive changes? The therapist's attitude and mindset, the approach, the service system approach, clients, the way it can empower.
Client's mindset, the idea of what is health and what is sickness, and who has the power, and how does change happen, and what really changes and what doesn't. You can't do anything about the past. Michael White, again, wrote another paper about histories of the present. There's different pasts. We can look at this. Which past should we evoke that will help us move forward, rather than just, I'm going to find the most miserable thing that's happened to you and we'll talk about it. Will that be useful or not?
I always think about, I've always thought about it in terms of every conversation that we ever have is going to be influential, and how the therapist hosts that conversation. If it's one time, we need to be accountable to what kind of influence that is hopefully going to have. I think, some conversations happen once and they can be disastrous. They can be re-traumatizing. They can be, violent conversations. And so if we think about if every conversation that we ever have is influential, and as therapists, if we're going into this work, we want to be able to be accountable to the kind of good influence that we want our conversations to have on people. And I think that really fits with a single session mindset and then framework. If we start to do that in our work, if we start to do that in our teams, in our services, we can really make sure that every conversation is going to be influential in the best possible way.
And I would want to add to that, Sonia, being open to being influenced as the therapist, or as the team member, or so it's a two-way influence.
Absolutely, yes. Yes. It's so therapists, we are trained that we are experts, we have advanced degrees, we know, and it's so hard for us to realize we know a lot, but the other person knows a lot too, plus it's the other person's life. So and that's very difficult for us to kind of, most of the good things I've learned from my clients, occasionally from a book or a lecture or something, but hearing how people dealt with things, how people let go of a problem. 3 years later, I'm facing the similar situation in my life. And I remember what Joe said that day in the office. And he's my consultant. He doesn't know it, and I'm not mailing him any check or anything. But that it's a two-way influence, and that's very hard. I think one of the things Jeff has said in some of the writing is that the term single session is, we're talking about disruptive. It's so good because it's an in-your-face term. It sort of challenges all your thinking about all the things we're saying, the mechanisms of change, how long it takes, who has the power, what changes and what doesn't. And I think we have to be careful at the same time that we don't alienate some of our colleagues by making them think we're telling them you can only do one session, or I can fix everything in one visit, or if it took more than one, that means you're not as smart as we are. Or,
Yeah.
Mm.
The familiar difficulties of our field in some way. Familiar eggshells.
I'm looking at the questions that you sent us. Have we addressed all of the questions in some way?
I think we have and more, which is
okay.
lovely. Yeah, I'm really, yeah. And
so if there was some other question you would like to ask us, or is there something, we should follow it up on that, or is there anything to fill in that we haven't got to? Now, I realize this is only one session, and we could have
it is.
And we need to make time our friend, and we're nearly finished. So
yeah. So I guess my question is really to invite you. Is there something perhaps that you'd like to share with viewers and readers of the articles and the edition, and that you haven't said today?
Yes, the wonderful Australian and New Zealand Journal of Family Therapy special issue is a wonderful appetizer, and if you like the flavor, you should really get the book.
Yes, definitely.
Pam, Jeff, and I, because there are 30 chapters that are not in the journal that are all sorts of applications. If you're interested in the cultural aspect, we're talking about the one article. There's 5 or 6 articles. If you want to hear about single session therapy in a sweat lodge in Western Canada with the medicine man chanting and how that goes, and then you want to hear about single session therapy, family therapy in China, and you want to hear about 2 people going to a remote village in Mexico and doing group hypnosis in one session after an earthquake, and if you want to hear about some of the issues that had to be dealt with bringing single session family therapy to New Zealand, to the Maoris. It's all in this book. So I'm not trying to sell books. I make about 50 cents a book, and I have given all the money I've made from every book to political causes. So it's not this. It's really, I think people will find it very interesting. If you like,
it's on my pre-order list.
They make wonderful Hanukkah presents, Christmas presents. I'm not sure what the Muslim holiday is this time of year, but they'd be good for those too. And bar mitzvahs, confirmation, baptisms. Yeah, don't hold back.
Excellent.
I'd want to say, I think a lot of people are doing it anyway in their way. And I just really encourage people who are at all interested in these ideas to just think about what would be the next step for them to just move towards embracing it more fully, because it really allows for one's own, preferred model and style. I've heard more than once clinicians saying this was one of the most stimulating kind of experiences. It really refreshed my love of the work. And so I just want to encourage people to give it a go.
Yes, thank you.
And maybe building on that, to maybe as a starting point, to be open to looking at the client contact data for their service. I was just working with an organisation that works with marginalised communities and have a very, supportive approach to clients. And when they saw that their client data, the most common number of sessions was 1 in family violence, in alcohol and drugs and general counselling, it really shifts your thinking. And then just to be open to give it a go. And you'll maybe it'll have the impact it's had on the 3 of us, where that simple idea then starts to get into your thinking. And it can start to change the way you approach, a meeting, a presentation, a clinical session,
and ongoing work and
ongoing work. And maybe a final thing to a plug too, that the Bouverie Centre, Pam and I have developed a online self-paced training program or training suite. It's probably about 8 to 9 hours self-paced. And there's a link where you can find more information, but we've been getting really lovely feedback about that. And that's a really nice way of being able to, if people are interested in taking this idea or these ideas a little bit further into their own practice and their organisation, that'd be a great start.
Great, thanks. I can put a link. People should go to the Bouverie Centre website, is that right?
I can send you a specific link that will guide people directly.
Great, thanks. And then for the book when it comes out. And I'll put that on the Facebook for the journal's Facebook as well. So that'll be great.
All right. Thanks, Sonia. Thanks for the interview and the opportunity. It was lovely to get together and have a good yarn.
Yeah, I think I might be tempted actually to check in with you next year sometime, this time next year, and ask how things are going post the book release and things like that, if that's all right with you.
Oh,
I'm always tempted to continue the conversation, which is not particularly a single session thinking, but
yes, it
A
is.
follow-up.
we can have a second single session.
we can, yes.
In a way, the thing would be to say, I won't ask that question because it's too challenging. I'll wait till next year, and it might not happen. So that'd be the single session thinking. But if we do get another opportunity, let's be open to that as well.
Yeah, lovely. And thank you again so much for this opportunity for me to speak with you, and thank you for your special issue for the journal. It really is the carrier, I suppose, of many wonderful ideas and practices and people, our field of family therapy and our clients as well. So that's very exciting for us.
Thank you, Sonia.
Thanks, Sonia.
You're welcome. And well, I'll say farewell until next time and see you around.
All right, great.
Well,
See you, Michael. See you, Pam.
Bye.
yeah.
Bye.